Thank you. I don't get to use that very often. Unruly group here at City Hall. Just kidding. All right, Madam Clerk, would you please take roll call, and then we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance.
You got it. Councilmember Giroux?
Here.
Councilmember Nichol?
Here.
Councilmember Perstak? Here. Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel?
Here.
Mayor Boyles?
Here. Okay, thank you. We are all here. Who would like to lead the Pledge of Allegiance? Carol? Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Perstak. Now is the time and place for public communications. Madam Clerk, is there anyone here for public communications? Before we get started, I just want to thank the staff since we've got, I think it looks like every department here. We got our Net Promoter Score results back, and we did really well. Again, I think the score was like a 55, wasn't it? Right around a 55 or?
Business is 55, residents is 51.
It's great. So if you guys don't know, companies like Apple typically range at about 65. So for a government organization to come in that high, that's a testament to all of you. So thank you for that. That's great. Okay, I'm going to turn it over. Yeah, round of applause. Yeah, thanks. So, Mr. George.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Well, I'll kick off our budget study session this evening or this afternoon. And let me first start off by saying, I've worked on many budgets over my 36-year career in local government for a number of cities. And in all sincerity, it was a pleasure working with the staff, the department heads, and particularly with Joe, our finance director, in walking through a very precise process of meeting with the individual departments all the way up to the point where we are this afternoon to present this budget before you. So I want to thank Joe and the department heads in particular, and also the council for making this process one that while it's not easy, it was very well thought out and very well put together to hopefully present you a workable and very readable budget this afternoon. So with that being said, I want to start off by saying that we are happy to present a balanced budget this afternoon. And I say that because we're coming off of 2 years of difficult pandemic, and to have a balanced budget at this point is really a fantastic position to be in. With that being said, though, I'd like to just outline a number of items that make me cautiously optimistic as we move forward. This budget, and hopefully, Joe, I'm not stealing any of your thunder. This budget does include, for instance, a $1.9 million enhancement, if you will, of ARPA funds. So that's in this budget, one-time monies. The budget, while TOT is up a little bit, we're still $5 million below where we were prior to the pandemic. We also have our last portion of transfer of the pension trust fund of $1 million in this budget. And we also are still freezing 17 positions as part of the budget. Expenses are still outpacing revenues, however slightly, but I bring those up again to be cautiously optimistic as we move forward. So while the budget is balanced, there are a number of items that help this 2022 budget. And then finally, just this morning I was reading, I believe in the Wall Street Journal or even on the news, that for the first time in a long time, the GDP is down in the country. So I don't know if that means I hate to be doom and gloom, but inching toward a recession, but the potential is there. So I say that to put this budget in context at this point, as we move forward and you make decisions on how we, as a city, move forward. So with that, I will turn it over to Joe to walk you through all the specifics of the budget and any questions you have. As you said, we're all here, all the department heads are here for that.
Thank you. So good afternoon, Mayor Boyles, City Council members. Before I dive into this, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach this year. Instead of me standing up here and boring council for an hour or two, I'm going to have some of my staff members also present on the slides. It gives them an opportunity to introduce themselves to council, which really hasn't happened, and also fine-tune their public presenting skills. So I'll kick it off, and then I will hand it over to staff to do some of the slides. So here's a snapshot of the city, all the city's funds. Last year, we had about 160 million citywide. Of course, line number one up there, general fund, is always the largest fund for the city. Last year, it was 77.6 million. This year, we're going to be 81,745,000. Just a little over 50% of the total budget for the city. I'll just touch on some of the other key ones. So the water fund, which is line item number 2, the second largest fund in the city at 32.4 million. You can see there's a slight increase there from the prior year, and most of that has to do with the cost of water, 5% increase that the city is seeing for the purchase of water. We have no local ground source, so we do purchase 100% of our potable and recycled water. Transportation funds, that's like your Measure R, Measure M, Prop A, Prop C. For the most part, it's almost identical to the prior year. The POBs, debt service fund, so that's the POBs that were issued last year. Saved the city over $84 million over a 19-year period and helped really get us to where we are today with this budget that's before you. Wastewater fund, you're going to see there's a decrease there compared to last year, and that has to do with a cut in the capital projects. So we did have, for many years, it was sitting on the books in the wastewater fund, the bathroom at the beach, and there was $650,000 sitting there, tied up. So we didn't re-budget that for this year, so it's sitting, it got moved back to fund balance. So it's sitting there in fund balance. And if council does want to, revisit those bathrooms, we can talk about how that should be budgeted properly.
Joe, that specifically is to plumb the bathrooms and connect it to a sewer line, correct?
That is correct, because it's currently on septic right now, and it was originally, I think, supposed to be plumbed into Chevron, and that original design, I guess, is really no longer valid design anymore. And that
As it
cost.
turned out, there was no pipe to run it to at Chevron, was the issue.
Yes, and Public Works Director, Mr. Sassoon, probably can speak to it more, but yes, that is correct. And then the cost today would actually be much higher than the $650. So that's the reason for the decrease there. Line item 6, the general fund CIP. So we do have carryover there. However, the new requests are not budgeted in there. After tonight's discussion, if council moves forward with staff requests plus any other additional requests from council, we'll put that in there and that number will increase. So that's line item number 6. A couple more line items I'll touch on there. The workers' comp fund, you'll see a slight increase, about $130,000, and that has to do with premiums. So what we budgeted for claims is pretty spot on this year. We did a large increase this year, and we're carrying it over to next year in claims expense, but the insurance is going to increase by that dollar amount. So that's the increase there for the workers' comp. General liability, we're seeing an increase of just over $200,000, and that's not an increase to the insurance, but that's an increase in claims, and that's it could be general claims against the city for a trip and fall, a tree falling on someone's property, or also employment claims. I won't go over line by line the rest of the funds. If there's any other questions, council has any particular line item, we are going to get into more details of each of these funds after we go through the general fund. But if you do have any questions now, I'm here and can respond to them. And then what the plan is to go over the general fund, And we'll go over revenues, appropriations. We'll dive into reserves and what the appropriate reserve level is for next year. We'll touch on the economic uncertainty reserve, and then we'll dive into CIP. And if we have time, hopefully we will, then we'll dive into the other funds. So I'm going to turn it over.
Quick question. Sorry, quick
yes,
question,
yes,
Joe.
sir.
With Topgolf now online, I'm sure that, I mean, because we have policy in place as to where money coming in, how it will be distributed.
Yes.
Is that broken up, and are we already getting some sort of indication from their first month or half month open, what we'll be looking at?
So most of the revenue sources are a fixed amount. The only one that's variable is the 3% of alcohol sales.
Got it.
So we do have a minimum guarantee of 200,000, and because they just opened and it was towards the end of the month, we don't have an indication yet. But I did visit the facility with my family about a week and a half ago, and I'm assuming it will get more than the minimum floor of 200,000, the way they're doing business.
Got it.
So,
Thank you.
And I do have a slide on that, sir, a little bit into the presentation, how we're adhering to each of the policy components that council did set up.
Perfect.
Okay, where's Dino? All right, Dino.
Good afternoon, Mayor Boyle, City Council. I'm Dino Marsoci, Treasury and Customer Services Manager. I'll be presenting the general fund revenues today. So the proposed revenues, you can see we're expecting a $6.4 million increase over the prior year. Remembering though the prior year was lower than most of our years due to the pandemic. The biggest increases are going to be from transfers in interest and rentals, both of which we'll discuss in future slides. Here's a good graphic showing a pie chart. We can see the relative size of each of the different revenues.
Can you go back to that slide so we can, remember, we don't have this in our I don't think we-
Okay, sure.
We don't have this, no.
No,
You don't have the
I don't think so. Joe, you gave us a preview.
should be in the presentation.
I don't think so. I don't think any of us found it. But hey, while they're
We have
researching that,
Exhibit A,
Yes.
proposed 5-year CIP, Exhibit B, Police and Fire, and Exhibit C, Arts and Culture Advisory Committee formal budget request.
No packet of the actual presentation. We'll get that.
okay, yeah. But quick question while they're coming up with that. The 81 million, 81.7 million, do you know?
Yes.
That's up from the prior period, but how far off of that was our peak pre-pandemic? 'Cause
pre-pandemic, we were probably in the mid-80s or high 80s.
So if COVID never happened, we probably would be somewhere around 86 to 88 million. So yeah,
and
quite a bit
when
off.
we had the Great Recession, can you remind us what the delta was between the peak year and like call it 2007 or whatever that was for the city, or maybe 8 with trailing, and then what we dropped to, what the absolute dollar swing was and percentage, you remember
Yeah, the
roughly?
dollar amount, I don't exactly recall, Mayor, from going back to the Great Recession. But as a percentage, it was somewhere between 20 and 25%.
Thank you.
I believe we dropped to 61 million on our general fund. That's it for the Great Recession.
Okay, shall I continue to the next slide? Okay. So here you can see the pie chart showing the different percentages. So the top 6 would be sales tax at 16%, business license at 15%, TOTs at 13%, and that's number 3, but before the pandemic was number 1. Property tax holding at 12%, and then Chevron and UUT each about 9%. So those top 6 equals 74% of the total revenues for the general fund.
Dino, correct me if I'm wrong, but TOT used to be the second most important, right? Or was it number 1? It was number 1. Okay, so now it's in third.
Number 1, yes.
And then we are vulnerable with BLT because that is a function of square footage and head count.
Yes.
Correct? So
Correct.
if we had 10 or 20% less employees or occupied space, we would take a major hit there as well.
We would, yes.
Okay. Thanks.
And that other revenues is reflective of the one-time ARPA funds? Is 1.4
The-
that, is that an 8.2 without that?
The other revenues, no, the transfers in is where the ARPA funds are. The other revenues, that's property transfer tax.
Got
We're
it.
expecting an increase there for next year. That's, but yes, several categories, but property transfer tax would be the biggest change from the prior year. And the ARPA would be in the transfers in. So you can see here the trend showing before the pandemic and during the pandemic and projections going forward to next year of those top taxes, top revenues. So for TOT, you can see at the lowest point, it dropped to about 30% of what it was before the pandemic. And now for next year, we're projecting about 66% of where it was before the pandemic. Fiscal years 20 and 21, you can see total lost revenue in sales tax was just about $4 million. And then over those 2 years, about $16 million in lost revenue from the transient occupancy tax. So some of the assumptions that we've made for this this budget is TOT rising back up to 70 to 75% occupancy rates. Pre-COVID, we were up about 88 to 90%. And then the other issue is a combination of the occupancy and also the room rates, which haven't fully come back yet to where they were before. As Mr. George mentioned, the ARPA rescue plan, that 1.9 million, so that made up for part of the 16 or the $20 million in lost revenues from the TOT and sales tax, but this is the last year we'll be receiving that. So next year, we'll either be looking for TOT to come back or any possible additional tax measures that may make up for the difference next year. Transferring from the pension trust to pay CalPERS, we just want to use $1 million to pay the UAL. This should be at least the last time for quite a while, if ever, that we have to do this, because now we're super funded. It's after we issued the POBs and the great returns that CalPERS had, we were super funded. This year we'll take care of that, and then depending on CalPERS performance, we should be pretty good for several years.
That big caveat though there, because S&P has had its worst quarter since
Right.
1980. So CalPERS can't be doing well right now, I would think. Do we have any early indication of what the impact would be on another UAL for us?
Yeah, I had a conversation with a CalPERS investment officer about 2 weeks ago. And right now, they're projecting they're going to come in at 5.9%. So they don't just have equities, they have private equity, they have real estate, bonds. So 5.9 is their projection. Their discount rate went from 7 last year, and now it's down to 6.8 this year.
I thought, so they're ultimately going down to 6.5, or no? Did they
Over
have-
time.
Okay.
Because if they do it too quickly, it's too much of a shock to the system and then a cost to the employers.
So we would have to cover the delta between the 5.9 expected return, assuming that's it, and the 5.8?
6.8, yes, sir. So
6.8,
about 0.9%, 90 basis points is
What would that
they're
be for us, roughly?
It would probably be in the range of, I have to do the exact numbers, but probably about $2 to $3 million.
Okay,
And we have more than that in reserves with CalPERS.
great,
So,
thank you.
And then Joe will actually come back up now and talk about the Topgolf revenue and how that's going to go.
I just have one question too. On the transient tax, have we done an outreach with the hotels to find out who's coming back to travel? Because I know a lot of business isn't traveling still, and are they anticipating that? 'Cause, what percentage of our TOT comes from business travels versus personal travels?
I don't know if Ms. Voss can answer that question, but.
So I don't know the exact percentage, but I do know that the weekends were not the strong sellout point for the hotels. They would be typically booked between Monday through Thursday, and the effort was to try to bring those tourist travelers, leisure travelers into the hotels. I have heard that, for example, over the Super Bowl weekend, they were sold out at many hotels, if not all. There were some very marquee concerts that took place at either SoFi or the Forum, where they sold out when those artists were in town. So, you know, they're doing the best they can in terms of getting that weekend traveler, but the bread and butter was really the business traveler, and that's still hurting.
And that's all right. And so that February number could be an anomaly with that Super Bowl number in there. So we really shouldn't take that February number as, you know, we should really account for that anomaly.
No, we don't. So we get monthly reports, and the trend for the last 7 to 8 months has been anywhere from 70 to 75% occupancy rate. And so that's what I'm just using that trend, unless something, you know, changes in the economy, which I'm not sure it will in the short term. We'll probably continue to see that 70 to 75% occupancy rate.
We are seeing the room rate eke
Come
up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes, coming back. The room rates really dropped low, so you could have a higher occupancy rate, but you're not paying as much per room, therefore the tax is lower. So we are seeing that not only the occupancy is ticking up, but the room rate's getting higher too, so that's positive.
Yeah. That, you know, so we get monthly reports on it, so we can see if something does start to, you know, tick up and see that trend, but it's been pretty flat since August.
Were any of our hotels used in that program for Room Key, Project Room Key, or?
I'm not sure. I don't know if Chief Bermudez, did you know?
Yeah, I mean, like
No.
especially the hotel, right behind the Ralph's.
Yeah,
Can you remind me what that is? Are you talking about the turnkey?
the homeless
Yes.
program.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I don't think they were.
Yeah, I don't believe we did.
Yes. We were,
They did?
yeah,
Which hotel?
The one behind the Ralph's.
I believe the residents. But yeah, we participated as a city. Is that a, yes.
Yeah, and I know South Bay COG, they're looking at doing a program with like a pre-funded card that could help transients get a
That
hotel
means
room.
tomorrow at 3, if you'd like.
So. Okay, I just do want to touch on one more point. So that $1 million, $1,015,000 transfer from the pension trust. So that is a request to pull out of the pension trust and use it to pay down the unfunded liability of $1 million. That's kind of like that last hanging chad out there. In theory, we should not see a UAL for quite some time unless there's really some major losses that CalPERS experiences.
Joe, I have to ask, remember the year that the market did like 7.5%, they came in at less than 100 basis points? Do we have reasonable assurance that their projection, like what was their projection in that year, if you recall?
It was below their discount rate. I want to say they were probably, from what I call 4.5%. You know, but last year they were 21.3%, which is great.
Great, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I won't belabor it, thank you.
So, Top Golf revenue. Councilmember Nickel, you had asked about this, so I did put the slide in there. So, Council did adopt the Top Golf revenue policy April of 2021, where it really earmarked where those funds are to be dedicated. So, the annual 1.3 million ground lease for the driving range. 70% of that, the policy was 60 to 70% to be dedicated to the pension contribution. We're requesting 70%, and then 30 to 40% be dedicated to the repayment of the loan to the equipment replacement fund. So we're requesting 30% there. So $910,000 for the annual pension contribution. That will go towards the pension obligation payment, and $390 will go towards the outstanding loan of $5.7 million. The annual $200,000 community benefit contribution, that's dedicated to rec and park capital improvement projects, and we have $2.5 million once we get to the capital that's earmarked towards rec and park capital improvement programs. So $200,000 will go towards that $2.5 million. Recurring 3% beverage fee payment at the driving range with a guarantee minimum of $200,000. This is dedicated to general fund, general use purposes per the policy. and the annual 20,000 golf course ground lease payment dedicated to general fund, general use purposes. Any questions on that? Okay. Okay, now on to the appropriations request. This slide before you, we do have where we're estimated in this year at 78.9 million. What we're requesting for next year as appropriations, 81.7 million. It's ranked from top, police being the highest budget, all the way down to city council with the lowest. So I'll touch on the first two, police and fire. And if I can direct your attention to Exhibit B in your packet. This is the detail of the police and fire budget. So we met with both the chiefs and their staff more than once. And basically this itemizes out all of their expenditures. And what you're seeing in Exhibit B is you have 1920 actuals, 2021 actuals, so you have some type of guidance of what's going on. Now remember, that's COVID. And then we have the adopted 21-22 budget. And then the orange column that you see more towards the right of the page, that's their budget input. And then one column over is their total request. So for instance, on that first page, it's police administration. If you go down towards the bottom of that page where it says on the far right, account 6206, contractual services, it itemizes out all their contracts. So the first one's all traffic solutions. You go all the way over to the right, 7,200. The next one down, biometrics for all, go all the way to the right, 800, and so on. So it's itemizing and justifying each of their contracts. So building, does council not have this attachment? So I'm on attachment B. Yeah, attachment B.
So this, B is pretty much what we'd ask for in terms of the bottoms-up build or zero-based budgeting. The justification.
That is correct. So this is for the operating and maintenance. So the personnel costs are not all in there, but the operating and maintenance, it's all justified as far as itemization of each of their line item expenditures. It's pretty detailed.
Joe, is there a reason that the budget variance on salary is so high and public safety?
Yes. So we did have some vacancies in the current budget, frozen positions, right? Frozen lieutenant, frozen sergeant.
That's okay. So that's what's being reflected in those costs.
Correct. And then some increased costs for, just general contracts. For instance, like my contract with the auditors, there's an automatic COLA increase each year, CPI increase.
And we're seeing that first big increase on the dispatch. It looked like that contract dispatch. I mean, that
is correct.
That was we went over that 16 months ago or something, and now it's finally appeared. But it's a significant overrun, or not overrun, but
an increase. Right. Right. So there's some contractual increases, operational increases for supplies. It's just it's costing more to buy widgets today. And then, yes, salaries is a big component of it as well. So this is for both police and fire. And then you'll see in the police budget, all their O&M line items are under administration. So if you go to like a patrol division, which is 3102, there is no O&M line items. So police has all their O&M.
What page is that, Joe?
Attachment B, page, I don't know, in your packet.
it's one of three. It's patrol and safety, 43102, 4X's.
Right.
Slide 8, page 8 and B. Yeah.
Yeah, It's between the Jack of Diamonds and
Joe, what was your point you were making, though, when we were trying
So,
to find out?
My point is, in the police budget, all their operating and maintenance costs are in the police administration division. 3101, right.
Okay.
So you won't see that in any of the other police divisions. It's zeroed out, and that's why, because it's all in the administration division. Fire, though, they have it broken out amongst all their divisions, their O&M line items.
And on that administration, because the salaries part-time has gone up, like, basically doubled. Right? Because 100,000 to 211? Am I missing?
No, looks like it.
Right?
Well, no, 176, 200.
No, it's, there's a year-to-date column, maybe that's what you're referencing.
Department budget input for 20, I'm looking at
Yeah.
22, 23.
Yeah, but this was the year.
Oh, okay. I see, gotcha.
But with that, it's a pretty comprehensive budget. And the increase over the prior year for police is about 4.3%. So, I don't know if you have any questions, Council.
I just have a question about the process, Joe.
Yes.
From a budgeting standpoint. So, for this example, police did a bottoms-up build on all their O&M expenses, and then
Right.
it was submitted to you. Was there any back and forth justification,
absolutely,
or
yes.
what transpired after it was submitted from a department standpoint?
Yes, yeah, so my staff was there, and a lot of dialogue during these meetings. Maybe we can let some of the department heads testify to it, but, I had my red pen out, made some corrections and changes and really questioned them about, what their requests are, what they're asking, or what the increase was to the particular line item. Why is it increasing so much?
And then for new headcount, can you just explain the process for each department for new headcount?
So we do have a slide on frozen positions and new headcount. As far as new FTEs, I believe there's only one request for a new FTE. And then there's some requests to obviously unfreeze many of the positions that we had frozen because of COVID. Remember last year, for this current budget, we had this $9 million deficit we had to address, and that was one of the ways we did it, was by freezing a lot of positions. But now that that's not necessary, and, we do want to provide first-class service to the business community and to the residents. In this budget, a lot of those frozen positions were unfrozen. I do have a slide on that, I think in 2 or 3 slides from now.
Joe, the SHOT Show made it through the vetting process?
I'm sorry?
We budgeted to send people to the SHOT Show in Vegas? Joe? It's like the world's biggest gun show.
So I don't know, Chief, if you want to speak to that at all?
Chief? I hope those shoes are danceable. Here we go.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. The SHOT Show, although it sounds fun and the name doesn't help it, we do send officers to that because sometimes we are looking for new weapons or new target systems in our range, and we send 1 or 2 range officers to that event to really keep up to date on what's the latest things that we can train our officers in.
Very well.
Thank you.
Joe, on the revenue
Yes.
categories, it's always struck me that the city council line item is somewhat potentially disturbing. If someone looks at that number, they're like, what is comprised of that number? I think we
Sure.
ought to look at reallocating some of that's in there, because that's certainly not salary of council members up there.
So it's,
And I know there's assistants in there, and
Yes.
there's other things, O&M in
It's
there
a
too.
city
but
employee.
From a public perception standpoint, that line item looks pretty bad. in my opinion. I don't know how my colleagues feel. It's just something to think about. I don't know.
I thought most of that
Is the
money went to
mayor's
Scott.
salary,
Yeah,
is mayor's salary different than ours?
No, definitely not. So maybe, I don't know if that's critical for this publication, but it's always struck me that that just doesn't sit right.
Sure, I can work with City Manager Daryl George, and really, it's probably the largest cost is, one of the city employees, is a full-time employee, that's budgeted in there. I don't, we could talk and figure out where to reallocate those costs.
Okay.
So they would still show up in the general fund, just in a different department.
Okay.
Joe, I don't mean to come back to this and derail slightly, but is this the last year that we have the increase on our dispatch system? I mean, it occurs to me that now we're paying $2 million a year for that, which is a huge amount of money. And I don't recall offhand what that scale looked like. I remember it was a couple step increase. Is it possible, though? I think it's going up again.
I don't think this is the last year. I don't know if either chief knows specifically.
It's a 5-year contract, and I do believe there's one more increase in the remaining term of the contract.
I mean, that's worth bearing in mind as we allocate these things, that is a huge number. I mean, if you're talking about something that's up to 3.5% of our general fund budget going to dispatch, it's worth noting. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
I'm just going to talk about the fire budget a little bit while you're perusing through that document. So the fire budget is increasing by 3.6%, or 490,000 compared to the prior year. That is one of the lowest increases if you look on compared to all the other departments.
So Joe, the savings we were looking for from that department are not reflected in here?
The savings of, you're talking about
That department, fire specifically.
the extra $1 million for this year is not reflected in here. No, it is not.
And does that reflect an unfreezing of their 3 positions, the paramedic, the service coordinator, the prevention specialist, that salary overage, does that reflect as unfrozen?
Let me hop to that one, and I'll come back. So here's what's being proposed is frozen for the entire year. You can see there's 3 fire positions.
And so this unfreezes some of the dozen we had frozen before. That's the overage.
Right.
Got it.
Right, correct. Correct. And since, this is a budget study session, whatever council direction you give to us, obviously we'll go back and incorporate that into the development.
All right, so here's my
of the budget.
confusion. The direction in fire in particular was to have $1 million in recurring savings. Am I correct on that, right? And not only do we not get that in the last budget cycle, but now we're looking at a 4.3% increase. I just want to make sure I'm reading this properly. So I'm not sure where to start. And the reason why I say it that way is that if direction was given to get one thing done and that, not only that thing not get done, it doesn't seem like it's going to get done and there's going to be an increase. I'm having a little trouble wrapping my head around that.
Yeah, so I know there are discussions happening with city manager, and I don't know if...
Yeah, if I can
Sure.
just, yes, in the time period that I've been here, I have been working with the fire chief. I completely understand the council's request to look at a reduction within that department. The chief and I have been working on coming up with reductions. To date, we have identified about half of that amount in this year's budget, and moving forward, there are other measures that we're looking at to achieve the $1 million. I mean, one of the things, for instance, that we've set up, or that I've set up, is I'll be meeting with the city managers of Redondo Beach and Manhattan Beach next week to talk about, for instance, a shared battalion chief position. And that alone, if we can work that out, is about a $600,000 savings. So I can assure the council that there are items that are being looked at and put together. It's not in this afternoon's budget, but I will be bringing something to you very shortly to identify that savings.
Okay, but my understanding is that this budget study session is here so that we can point things out, so that it can be fixed, and then we can actually approve the budget. So again, I'm gonna state that even if you do the battalion
Right.
chief, et cetera, so if you're asking for $1 million in savings, and now you're asking for almost $500,000 in increase appropriations, we're already netting out at $1 million, and we haven't done anything yet. So I think I'm struggling with the math.
Right.
Yeah, yes, I hear you loud and clear, council member. One thing to point out, if, let's say that million was actually cut, you would still have some increases, inflationary increases on supplies, contractual services. There'd be slight, obviously, it wouldn't be the $500,000.
Maybe
but-
$1.5 million more?
No, that's what I'm saying, but you wouldn't have the full $1 million savings due to those inflationary.
I'm not gonna belabor the point, but I think you get what I'm
Yes.
getting at. That's
Yes,
all.
absolutely.
My basic math skills just is not working for me right now.
Yep.
And only because it was directed by a council vote. I'm not saying that this is, what I'm gonna stand on the hill. We actually voted on this. And then if it doesn't get done, I'm confused as to what our role is in the process.
Well, since this is our finance director said, this is a study session or a workshop, I know the actual adoption of the budget is the last meeting in June. So between now and then, we will come up with what the council's looking for.
Sorry, Joe. All right, when I look at the appropriations by department, pretty much so I guess I'm not clear still. So IT, for example, 28% increase of 855,000. How much of that is headcount versus?
Yeah, quite a bit. So IT had, I know 2 vacant positions that will be filled next year. And what we also did is the software costs that were spread out amongst different departments. We started that process in the 21-22 budget, put it in IT. We found quite a bit more. And so now that software budget is almost $1 million. And that's all been moved to IT, where before a lot of it was in other departments.
And all not amortized over time, all hitting in one?
So those are the annual license and maintenance costs that is required.
And then city attorney, $200,000 increase, is that does that include all these lawsuits we've been getting hit with, different?
Yes, it does. So I met with Mr. Hensley, we had an in-depth conversation, and so that's all related to an increase. In fact, I'm stealing my staff's thunder. They were supposed to present the other line items.
Justify the expense, I think.
I want to be real clear. The 200,000 is, some of that is related to increased personnel issues. You've got 4 labor groups up for negotiations this year, and so there's a significant increase in the labor negotiator budget. We use Irma Rodriguez for that, and so that's where there are significant increases. There's a $3 million set aside in the budget this year that's never been there before for the 7 outstanding lawsuits, which is a separate budget item.
So, and that's coming straight out of the general fund?
No,
Or
that's in the general liability and workers' comp, most of it's in the general liability fund. And we did have a line item there for that before, but we definitely bumped it up.
But that 3 million that you referred to is after any coverage we have insurance, that's net cost to the city?
Correct.
Yeah, isn't it our per claim cost of the city, our deductible is 700,000, is that correct?
750,000.
750,000, great.
But I just want to make it clear that there's a much bigger increase than the 200,000 in the legal funds this year because of all the lawsuits.
So that 3 is on top of the 3.5 for workman's comp litigation. So we're talking, so those are separate, going to be separate line items.
I'll go back to this one. So if we look at, there's a glare on there for me, but if we look at line number 9, 3.3 million for general liability. So 1 million of that is for the insurance, and 2.3 million is for this litigation claims, plus what we have in the city attorney's budget in the general fund. And then there's also some in the workers' comp fund. Since some of
That's
the,
$7.6 million tied up.
well, we got insurance. Part of that is insurance.
Well, sure, yeah,
Yes.
part of that's
Yes.
the premium, but
Right.
at 10% of almost 10% of our budget.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. Yeah, and as an example, the general liability line item used to be, if we go back 3-4 years ago, was 1.92 million. So it's really come up.
So it's $6 million increase over the traditional typical baseline? Is that what you're saying?
If we go back, 2-3 years, yes.
So that would represent like 30 head count, 30 employees that we can't staff because of lawsuits, pending lawsuits from our employees? Is that about right, roughly?
I mean, I guess if you equated it that way, yes.
$200,000 average loaded wage and salary?
If this continues each year,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to let my staff briefly touch on some of these other line items. Was there any other questions on police or fire?
A quick question. I noticed, and this is not to pick on it, we have significant overtime already budgeted in. Now, granted, overtime happens, that's a matter of, but is there anything, this could be, you could defer on this because it's probably a question for the chiefs in terms of how we use scheduling and scheduling software and things. But it occurs to me that when we talk about savings in a particular safety department, that there's $500,000 we allocate in each department on overtime alone. And those things, if there are ways or creative ways we can schedule around it, that might take some of the pain out of trying to manage our way through these things, and certainly trying to manage things from the dais, which is not what the business we want to be in.
Okay, well noted.
Good afternoon, Mayor Boyles and council members. My name is Eva Gettler. I'm in finance, accounting supervisor, and I'm going to go over items number 3 through 8. So the first item is transfers out, and it is budgeted for $9.4 million, and this includes a pension obligation bond payment at $9.4 million, and also CIPs were included in the prior year budget. Number 4, Public Works. $4.2 million has been budgeted for 22-23. The 10.2% variance is due to the increase in fuel costs, which is doubled in the budget. And furthermore, the frozen and vacant positions from the previous year is being budgeted to be filled. Number 5, non-departmental, $6.02 million is budgeted for 22-23, with a decrease from the prior year, which included salaries and benefits and O&M for the emergency planning division. $3.1 million is budgeted for retiree health insurance and $700,000 for general liability insurance, with an increase of $200,000. Also, there is a CalPERS unfunded accrued liability payment with bond proceeds. Number 6, community services. There's 5.6 million in budgeted with a decrease of 4%. And this is due to the closure of the plunge. For number 7, development services. $3.8 million is,
Can we back up? Community services. So the 24,000 that were lower, that's due to the plunge?
the closure of the
Just
plunge.
24,000, that's all, or is it? Okay.
No.
Can we just touch on that real quick? Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's, you know, when you look at the budget holistically, we're down 24,000. You have staff increases in salaries, you know, step increases, so the budget increased, but because of the, you know, the plunge closure, it helped bring it down. Now, we didn't budget for the plunge in our current budget. We did put some staff costs there to maintain it. We're not nowhere near what we budgeted, so we just reduced that budget to be more of a reality, just to kind of keep it maintained. So that's what this is.
How much did the average wage in community services go up with the minimum wage changes, or is that?
So it went from 14 an hour, so December 31st, prior, it was 14 an hour. January 1st, minimum wage went up to 15.
LA City, but we're paying that. Was it
state.
county as well?
State.
Oh, state, okay, state.
State.
Yeah,
So we
city
followed the
first,
state.
That's right, yeah.
And the state minimum wage
Yeah.
went up. Now, there's talks in the state legislature about possibly increasing that again, and they're looking at $17 to $18. I don't know if that will happen anytime soon, but there is discussions on it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so number 7, development services. So we're budgeting 3.8 million. Vacant positions will be filled, and it's being budgeted for this coming fiscal year. Also, I'm sorry, number 8, information technology services. We have a budget of 3.8 million. And like Joe mentioned earlier, this is because they're moving the licensing software to this department of approximately $1 million.
So I just have a question about unfreezing headcount. So one of the things that we had talked about, you know, the net sum headcount before, that was really to challenge everyone to rethink, to make sure we're the right size department and that we actually are optimizing headcount. And when you go for a year without a headcount, things shift. So I've never been a fan of just unfreezing headcount. I've been a fan of you now have to justify why you need that headcount. And did that process happen?
So during the budget process, you know, that is discussions we had, and you know, I'll use development services for an example. You know, there's a lot of work that we're using outside consultants to get done, and you know, I'm not going to speak for Mr. Allen, but there was definitely a justification there to unfreeze and fill
and
vacant
that's why I just
positions.
want to make sure that there's a clear process, that we are really taking a hard look and are re-identifying job descriptions, and we're actually going through a justification process, because I really think you just don't now return on the spigot, because things have changed, responsibilities changed, positions, people take up pieces of other people's responsibilities, and so there should be a right sizing. This would be a golden opportunity for us to actually say, are these the headcount we need, or do we need different headcount, and are they, I just don't want to start, you know, spreading the workload that was done in a year by 2 people to 4 people because, oh, we're just bringing this headcount back. Like, as long as you feel confident, or there's a process in place, I think that's what I think we would like to know, that there's a real clear, and people really have to do clear justification on bringing those headcount back?
Absolutely. Yeah, great question, great points. And I know we have been bringing, I'll use an example, my finance manager left in February. We brought that position to council in April, redid what we're looking for, and also, looked at the salary range and the responsibilities. Council approved that. I know there's several requests to actually change positions, to reclassify positions. So yes, department heads are doing that. And there's also a lot of retirements in the pipeline. So while, some of these other positions were unfreezing, as the retirements leave, they're kind of reevaluating it again. And, we probably have, I want to say 10-15% of our staff will be retiring within the next year or two. In PD, I know it's much higher than that. Chief Bermudez, I believe you told me it was something like 30% that you have eligible to retire. So we're seeing that not just that shift of people leaving, and that gives department heads kind of fresh eyes to look at, reevaluate their department. Kind of like what I did when I first came on board. There was no accountants in finance, which was a little bizarre. And I lost some individuals, came to council. I need some accountant positions, so reclassified those positions. So we have been doing that internally.
Do you feel the process to do that is clearly? I mean, I know we have with HR, we've had a lot of changes, and there's been a lot of workload on HR. I mean, is this something? I just want to make sure we as management team have a real feel that the process is really the best process to optimize our
Yeah,
staff.
Joe, if I could just add. Sure. Yes, absolutely, council member. When we, prior to the meetings with the city manager that each department had, I did speak with Joe about the frozen positions and the number. And so there was not just an assumption that you can come in that we were going to unfreeze these positions and make that recommendation. So each department had came in and had to justify those positions that they wanted to unfreeze. So there was a lengthy discussion about the positions, how it fit into the overall plan of that department, whether it was potential retirees or workload issues. And so there wasn't a very, pretty detailed discussion about each of those unfrozen positions that we're recommending tonight.
Okay, and then I have another staff member that's going to go through the rest of the budget.
Good afternoon, Mayor Boyce and the council members. My name is Vicky Chow. I'm the management analyst at Finance Department. So I'm going to continue the discussion on the rest of the departments. City Manager Department. City Manager Department fiscal year 23 proposed budget is 2.8 million. Compared to fiscal year 22 adopted budget, the fiscal year 23 proposed budget increase is 14%. The net increase of 344,000 includes 226,000 for personnel and 118,000 for O&M. Personnel side, two positions vacant in fiscal year 22 have been planned to be filled in fiscal year 23. O&M side, economic development net increase is 84,000 in fiscal year 23, mainly for the annual economic development and tourism marketing campaign. Finance Department. Fiscal year 23 proposed budget for Finance Department is 2.6 million. The 6.4% increase is due to the filled Deputy City Treasurer 2 position in mid-fiscal year 22, and the salary adjustment for both the CFO and the Finance Manager positions. HR Department. HR Department's fiscal year 23 proposed budget is about 1.5 million. It goes up by 345,000 Four factors drive the 29% increase compared to the fiscal year 22 adult budget. Labor negotiation, employee investigation, employee engagement initiatives. And the last one is that HR department has been fully staffed. Now, it was not fully staffed in the entire fiscal year 22. City Attorney Department, since Mr. Hensley already discussed about it in detail, so I'm not going to say anything here. And the City Clerk Department, the 20% decrease is attributed to the frozen Deputy City Clerk 2 position. City Council, since you raised some question, we will do some research and find more details for you. The last one is the COVID-19 response. Here are some updates for the FEMA reimbursement. The All-Hazard Incident Management Team has submitted total 13 public assistance applications to FEMA for about $3.5 million, including $1.4 million for O&M costs and $2.1 million for personnel costs. So far, the city only received $400,000 from FEMA. There's still more than $3 million outstanding balance for funding. Usually it takes a long time, sometimes more than 10 years to get reimbursed from FEMA. So just some updates. And please let us know if council have any questions on the proposed budget for those departments.
Can we earmark how the council in 10 years spends the FEMA dollars when they come in? Since we didn't get to spend them? I mean, can we really can't?
Can we pre-order tank tops with Randy Collins' face on them? We pay.
You're very optimistic, Councilmember Nicholas, assuming we do get the money from FEMA.
But do we have any kind of certification or anything from them that indicates that they have agreed that this is a legitimate claim and they will slate it somewhere in their books to pay it, even if they never have that money appropriated to do so? But do we have that says yes, we agree, and yes, this will be paid?
So the way it works is, as Vicki mentioned, we've submitted 13 separate claims, and the reason for doing that instead of all one claim is because then we would probably not even have received the $400,000. So by submitting separate, smaller claims, Dr. Collins had a great idea that we'll get reimbursed quicker. So we have received $400,000. That's probably from the first two claims or so, but they will not certify those until they're ready. So they actually go through a whole audit process, each of those claims, ask a lot of questions, and then they disappear for several months, come back, ask a few more questions, and then eventually authorize or deny. They're going to do that for each of those claims, so it is going to take years before we know about all 13 claims.
I have to ask this question at every budget session, so I'm going to ask it now because it's aspirational. If we're unfreezing headcount, is there more code compliance in this budget? Do we have another code compliance? And I saw Development Services sprint out of here when they saw me look down at the Development Services tab. So do we know if we're considering adding headcount to that?
No, there's not additional headcount for code compliance.
I struggle with that because it is something that we send police to do. It is a totally imperfect tool for this. It is a negligible line item considering what we appropriate here, and it almost always pays for itself.
Okay, noted.
Yeah, I concur, Chris.
So we send police to look at noise complaints on a Thursday night, and they leave because there's no crime being committed. It is a code issue. It's a matter of the right tool for the right job, and it leads to happier residents because they actually get a tangible result, as opposed to banging on nails with a wrench.
To echo his point, you know, there's been a couple items that has come across that has come across this dais that has not gotten the support that one would think it would get, based upon our lack of code compliance and our ability to enforce codes and policies that some of us may wish to have in place. So, to that point, if you could please pass that along to Mr. Allen, let him know that it's important to us.
We'll do that.
Well, and we had talked about too for, Airbnbs, monitoring that. That revenue that we get from the Airbnbs could cover that cost.
So right now, that revenue ostensibly pays for the tracking technology that we use to monitor that program. But with the result of that tracking technology, an individual reads that and either serves the letters or approaches the city attorney for an enforcement action. But right now, we heap all of that into a very small department. I think a department of one right now. And I think it could probably, it's something, again, that I think is well worth its investment.
The other additive items, Joe, that we talked about in the strategic plan we talked a lot, and I think we had a consensus in terms of it being important with votes and everything else, is a business community connector, relator, ombudsman, whatever you want to call it, that would actually help grow the business base, because we know that business makes up 98% of this town's revenue. And we have to be more competitive. We have to do a better job. As we mentioned during strategic planning, we have cities like Miami that are eating our lunch in LA in terms of courting entrepreneurs, building the base. California continues to become more and more difficult to operate from a regulatory standpoint. We need to do a better job. And I believe we had consensus on the dais about the importance of funding a position that's going to help us build our revenue base. And so I don't see that in here. The other idea that we think we approved a couple years ago, and I'll own part of this because we haven't built out the model yet, is we have stakeholders. Our former supervisor, Janice Hahn, Holly Mitchell has been approached, Senator Ben Allen tentatively, Al Marisucci, who may or may not become our assembly member, and Dr. Patrick Soon-Shung and Richard Lundquist that have expressed interest in partnering with us on a public-private partnership incubator to, again, grow our business base here in El Segundo. It has already worked in other places, including down south, and I believe Harbor City with another supervisor, Mark Ridley Thomas, when he was in office. So that's another thing that I think we should have a placeholder for, that we haven't allocated any funds for, that again will help us grow the top line revenue. Because the reality is we have to grow the top line revenue, and this council hasn't in the last two councils expressed the interest to significantly increase taxes. And so if we're not going to do that, we got to grow our economic base. We have to bring businesses here and retain the ones that are leaving. And if we think they're not leaving, we got our head in the sand. Because I have friends that are leaving this great state because of how hard it is to do business here, regardless of what the governor says. So we have to fight that much harder to maintain our revenue base going forward. So just a quick thought on those two things, yeah.
To echo your point, and actually to Councilman Persick's point too, I think when we're looking at head count and trying to unfreeze and freeze it, I think we have to look at this as there are certain traditional positions that there have to have been efficiencies created to make some of those positions obsolete or not necessary. If we're going to add staffing, we want to do it towards what the new model is or what the new businesses are or how we can get revenues. So I think, and I don't mean to speak for everybody else, but for what I'm hearing is basically, I don't think we have an issue adding personnel, but in different and new directions to help us get to where we want to go. Does that make sense, Darryl?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and Mayor, your question about the business ombudsman, I know interim city manager, Mr. George, has some ideas on that, and possibly looking at some current vacant positions, and as you mentioned, Councilmember Perstek, retooling those positions. So.
Well, I know I know as simple as parking. I live on Main Street. I don't see anyone ticketing parking, yet we have a 2-hour limit. And I know parking in Santa Monica is $75 $75 a ticket, or ours is $45 a ticket. And I'm not saying I want to go up to $75, but if we, and I know, our restaurants are starting to come back. I'm not saying that we need meters. However, you have people parking there for hours and never getting a ticket. And I know that's, those are type of headcount that can bring in, I'm not saying it's a revenue generation, but it also it ensures people adhere to the rules. And I think we've been a little lax in that area. And maybe we should be talking about meter parking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I went somewhere recently and, parked in the stall, but there wasn't a meter there, it was one kiosk, so you had to go over to kiosk, punch your license plate in and, put your money in. And if the time expired, and you didn't move your car, I guess that central kiosk notified the parking enforcement. And what I was told by a lot of the patrons is you get a ticket right away.
And Joe Redondo's got even better than that. There's no hardware required. It's basically outside of a sign that says, here's the app, download the app, pay for your parking spot, and if it expires, you're getting a ticket.
So I'm hearing,
assuming there's enforcement.
Yeah.
But I know we're looking at parking management as a strategic priority this year, right? And that should, I think, include a revenue component for sure. Seems like at least 3 nods, 4. Chris is tentative at best.
The other thing I think Redondo does well, or at least the Riviera does well, is if you run a business down there, if you're there all the time, you can buy a monthly pass. It's a little sticker, goes in your window, and then you can park at any meter or any spot, without paying it. So, because I will say there's always, 2 sides to it, right? And the devil's advocate on that is people love coming to El Segundo because you don't have to pay for parking, and it's so wonderful. But I had a conversation today with a local business owner, and he and I both admitted that we park for more than 2 hours at our businesses, and so we are part of the problem. I know I'm not the only one, but the conversation I also had with him was like, well, then where do the employees park? Because that's the hard part, and so I think it's something that should be discussed, but we need to have a zoom in and zoom out. It's not just a one size fits all. It's going to solve the problem.
That's on tonight's agenda under item 14, I think, on for the downtown parking in specific. But so I'm just saying that's what I was seeing. I was kind of like, but that's a valid component. I think this part for all of these revenue generation items for an ombudsman or an incubator, those are all part of that city manager budget, because that's typically where we've housed those things before. So I don't know if that aids in your decision about how to recalibrate or
when we do bring it back with the comments we get this evening, that would be part of the manager's budget. Now, also, since we're on that subject, and I think it's also on a slide, the other quote-unquote new position that's being recommended also came out of the strategic planning workshop, and that would be a city hall receptionist position. That would be a person, after the remodel will be, the main entrance to City Hall, where this person would, not only take all the phone calls that come in, but also direct people to the various locations throughout the Civic Center area. So that was also part of the budget, the city manager's budget.
This is the one question I had on that, and this is a not so much probably a question, but something that allows us to describe for the people at home. When we talk about water funds and wastewater rates, we are very explicit to people that is not a city slush fund that can be used for things that don't involve water, because people really feel like they're getting jammed on water. So I think we want to be careful with how we are allocating the revenue for this position, that if this person is there to help people pay their water bill, I guess we can sort of back our way into it. But we need to be careful about that, because there are a lot of hurt feelings about the cost of water and the cost of flushing your toilet. So I'm a little bit leery of that.
And I know I mentioned this at the strategic planning session. I really think with automation and with our new website, we should use technology. I know it's good to have a face as well, but I'm sure we could come up with some hybrid solution where technology is the first front, and then I'm a person, I think there's there's a hybrid there we could come up with.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to the slide here. Any other questions on this or direction?
Actually, you know, just in our conversation, just as we were talking about revenue generation, it actually would be kind of a nice, interesting, as new headcount are proposed, we should be putting them in some kind of category. Are they a revenue generation headcount, or we do this in corporate America, like, what is it bringing, by bringing that headcount on, this new headcount, what is it doing for you? And like, you have to justify, I anticipate I'm gonna get X amount of, it's gonna increase our sales by 10% or 20, and that way we can justify the headcount. It might be a way for us to look at headcount a little differently and to see if this is a headcount is it to help customer service, to bring in revenue, for safety, like, so that we create some categories so we understand as we bring on new headcount, we can kind of categorize them, how they're actually, I don't know, just a thought. And we've never approached it that way, but I know, like, for me, in corporate America, we've always had to justify it with revenue, because obviously everything's about revenue. So, and you have to actually justify what that headcount's going to bring. And I don't know if you guys do that in government.
Yeah, most of the positions in government are to provide a service, so unfortunately,
Well, I know, but
it's not.
But we can kind of calculate it a little bit, like you can say,
Sure.
what kind of service will it bring? Is it just
Right.
operational, like, just, I'm sure we could come up with something.
Yeah, she's got a good point. Like, I keep going back to the fire department budget that Councilmember Drew brought up. We asked for $1 million reduction. We got a $500,000 increase. So I want to get us to 1.5 less. So how are we going to do that? And to Councilmember Perstuck's point, is this a must-have position that's required by law? Is this a safety position that must be had? Is there any other option for satisfying a medical call, for example? What are the criteria that are decided when we make these decisions? I think it's a very valid point, actually.
And one other thing, I don't mean to go back to fire again, because we kind of moved off of that, but I was thinking, one of the things that came up in one of our conversations was about this mutual aid, and I'm not going to let it go because it really bothers me that we're giving a 3-to-1 mutual aid to Manhattan Beach. And so I would love to know, is our overtime associated to that mutual aid? So because we're giving them 3-to-1 mutual aid, are we having to pay more in overtime just to cover their mutual aid? And I really want to get to understand that mutual aid, and should we come up with a baseline where it's equal and then they have to pay us for anything over the agreed upon mutual aid? Because I struggle with Manhattan Beach getting away with paying their people more with less headcount, and we are on the hook to cover their reduction in staff.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this field, but I believe there is no maximum cap on mutual aids. It's either you want to be part of that process or not, and then whenever it's required, you show up.
I understand, but I feel like we're being taken advantage of. We're carrying a heavier staff load. They have a lower staff. They have a lower, and I think she can speak to this, but we're carrying, 15, and they're carrying 9. Yet they're paying their staff more. Yet we're doing 3-to-1 mutual aid. So I feel like we're being taken advantage of, and I think that I don't.
Is that something you'd like to discuss right now briefly, or do you want us to bring back? Okay.
Yeah.
Please.
If I could go back real quick to the head count, and I'll simplify it we'll leave the fire suppression division, that's on one side. Fire prevention, for example, we had the fire marshal position frozen for 9 months out of the year, and we've had fire prevention specialists frozen all year. Now, we are out of compliance, and we're not doing cost recovery with our fire prevention inspections. So the justification for bringing those positions back our safety for the city. We have liability right now because we're out of compliance, and then there is cost recovery for those positions, so we can justify those positions.
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's not
that's-
revenue, but you know what I
But
mean?
Nicole, like our fire prevention, that's a great example of why that position needed to come back. You know, because we are out of compliance. We were, and there's a cost recovery. So I think that's a great example of justification of why that headcount needed to come back.
It's hard to explain in 5 minutes about how the mutual aid system works, and I did bring you the numbers of the last 3 years of how many times we go to Manhattan Beach and how many times they come over here. And the reason it's lopsided is because they have less, so they need our help more. So when we go down, those numbers are gonna move because we're gonna need help more, because at the end of the day, for every structure fire, you need 17 firefighters, and whether they come from Redondo or Manhattan or LA County or wherever, you're still gonna see that mutual aid increase, the lower your numbers go down.
But that's my point, is that we're carrying a heavier load and we're being a backfill for them, so I feel like we're being taken advantage of.
Right, and like city manager mentioned, that we're going to try to, I'm listening to what you're saying, and we're going to try to work things out, especially if we do the battalion chief shared services. Potentially, we can have them front 2 battalion chiefs, the B and C platoon, and we'll only front 1. So they'll be paying more, and we'll be giving them help. You know, there are options there, even though mutual aid is just, you know, it's reciprocal, and it's not supposed to be creating revenue or anything. But there are options that if you want to make it a little more fair for the neighboring cities.
I don't think it's about creating revenue. I think it's about reducing expense on our side. That's what we're getting to. We're not saying we should be making money off of Manhattan Beach. We're saying that, I don't know the exact numbers, but their population is at least double, if not more, than ours. And we're helping the big brother out an awful lot more. That's all, and that's just based on the numbers we're seeing. I think that's what we're getting at, that's all. We're not looking to make money off it, we're looking to lose less.
Right.
Because I think, to that point, if our staffing levels were identical to their staffing levels, would we be capable of providing the level of mutual aid we provide now?
No.
Exactly. And so what they've done, by their staffing levels being the level they are, we can't rely on them as much as they can rely on us. And that is where the word mutual becomes not mutual.
Right.
And that's where I think this dais stands. We understand that it's the way it's been for a while and it is what it is, but at some point we need to say, hey, okay, we can't keep going like this, because that might be good for their city and it's how they're balancing their budget and how they're getting by on theirs, but it puts us then in a precarious position with not only our residents, but also our firefighters, you know?
Right.
And so that's what I believe we are saying here.
My priority is for our fire department to respond to this community that we serve, and we'll work out what those numbers are going to be. And I won't belabor it, but we have this is a very different city from Manhattan Beach. I would compare us more to Santa Fe Springs, who has a similar square mileage, similar nighttime population, similar daytime population, hazardous materials occupancies, and other things. That's more realistic what their numbers are at than a bedroom community with a handful of low-rise buildings and restaurants. So that could be for another discussion, but essentially that's it.
Yeah, I think that there's some complexity, that I think that you know, there are also, because of the way the mutual aid works, right, for all we know, right, they could have an imbalance with the way they work in Redondo. And we are providing mutual aid because they're living in North Redondo and all of these things. So I think it's a great research project for the city managers and fire chiefs to work through. And presumably, is this part of do we get this data through the accreditation? Do they pour through do they look at this sort of utilization as part of the accreditation study?
Yeah, a lot of it.
Okay.
When is the accreditation?
Next question. When does that come up?
The standard to cover and the community risk assessment is on the shared drive, and Portland Base can help get it for you, all the information.
So all that stuff in the accreditation is already done?
Not all of the modules, but the standard to cover that talks about staffing and the community risk assessment as why we should staff to where we should. B is already in the shared drive, is already done. It's
Oh,
already completed.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Do you happen to know how many firefighters Chevron Fire Department staffs on a daily basis? And does it vary night to day?
Not exactly, but I know they have daytime inspectors, and their staff is down to basically a battalion chief and an engine company.
Okay.
And they augment that with emergency response technicians, basically the workers that throw on the turnouts and go help out. But it's a very skeleton crew.
Got it. Thank you.
You know, and just so the council's aware, when I do meet with Redondo and Manhattan city managers next week is on the shared battalion chief role. I do plan on discussing the mutual aid inequities.
Well, and, you know, mutual aid, we could have like, as long as it's equal, but once the, you know, maybe there's a trigger, once it goes past a certain inequality, then we get compensation back to cover the cost of that imbalance. And that's what we're talking about, is if we're having to pay overtime to help with mutual aid, I mean, they should be covering that cost of that overtime.
I'll leave these numbers with the city manager.
Okay, any other questions or direction from council?
So the only thing, you know, we talked about some opportunities within police and on code control, and can you guys come back to us with some ideas and enforcement of code control and parking in the next.
We'll have that by the next, by the budget adoption time.
Yeah, we only have about 30 minutes left,
yeah.
so I'm not sure we're going to get through this, so we may have to schedule a second budget study session so that we can incorporate the rest of the presentation and then come back to council on all the direction points that council did give staff.
Okay.
This is just a pie chart that shows the various departments. Of course, police, fire, public works are always the three largest departments. Just some quick assumptions here. So personnel is about 75% of that total 81.7 million. O&M is about 25%. Now that used to be 80-20. And basically because of the pension obligation bonds that were issued and the savings reduction in the pension cost, that had a direct reduction on how the budget was allocated. So we went down from 80% to 75% personnel, and then the O&M went up. Public safety, so that's both fire and police combined, make up about 51.5% of the general fund. And there's a breakdown by police, personnel costs, POB allocation, O&M, and then fire as well. Some further assumptions, salary and benefit adjustments were based on the multi-year MOUs. So most of the other groups still have MOUs that either go through September 30 of 2022, and I believe there's one group that goes to 2023. So that was built into the budget. The police and fire MOU did expire September 30th, 2021, so no further assumptions were made in this budget for any personnel costs related to police and fire. Zero-based budgeting for public safety departments, and then we already touched on the minimum wage. We also have that document that you have as attachment B. We have that for all of the departments, so we took that approach with all the departments. I didn't want to have your packet be 200 pages, so I didn't include all those departments, but that is available if council wants to see that next time. The equipment replacement charges. Last year, we only funded at a 50% level. For 2022, 23, we're recommending to go back up to 100%. This is just a snapshot of the frozen positions. So in prior years, 2021, we had 22 frozen positions. The current year budget, 23.5. For next year, we're proposing 14. Here's the budget, the frozen positions that we're proposing. This is for a full year. Here's the positions that we're proposing to freeze for a partial year. Could be because they're either being looked at to be, that position to be retooled and revamped to better meet our needs that we have, or because maybe we know it's going to be a long recruitment period and they won't get filled right away. Council has seen this many times. So if we go to where it says fiscal year 23, that's what we're proposing, the 81.7 million. You can see balanced budget, and again, if it wasn't for the ARPA revenues, we would have to find another 2 million somewhere. And then you can see going forward, the expenditures outpace the revenues. Snapshot of where we're at with our
Joe,
reserves.
is that a CPI increase, or is that some assumption of collective bargaining increases going forward? How did you come up with that?
So, no. So the what MOUs are in place, that's built in, but after that expiration of the MOUs, we don't have any further costs built in there.
So that's no increase going beyond these contracts that we're in right now? Or is there a CPI?
No, I'm sorry, you know what, we did do a CPI increase.
Okay.
I believe we used 2%.
Okay, thank you.
For salaries only, not for any of the other benefits. And then some of the O&M line items we took, for instance, utilities, we increased by 3%. Some of the supply line items we increased by 5%. So we looked at it line by line. This is where our reserve balances are. So we're starting off next year, July 1, with about 24.2 million. You know, there's the estimated revenues and expenditures, right around 81.7 million. So still leaves us with that 24.2 million. 20% reserve would result in $16.3 million, leaving about 7.9 million left over for council to allocate out. If you don't mind, council, I would like to get a little bit direction on where we want to go with our general fund reserve. So again, 20% reserve would result in that 16.3 million. 21% reserve would bump it up by about 800. Every 1% increases it by about 800,000. 22% is also there for convenience. You know, one of the concerns I have moving forward is, let me show you this, Wall Street Journal, right on the main page, U.S. economy shrinks 1.4%. So our first quarter in 2022, you know, it was negative. Now, if we have that again in the second quarter, that means there's a recession. And, you know, it's very well that could happen. And what does that mean? You know, is that going to have a negative impact on the city's revenues? Typically, it has, but there's a lag. So while the private sector experiences that right away, municipalities tend to start experiencing that, you know, anywhere from 6 to 9 months after the private sector does. So that's something to keep in mind, and maybe a reason why, just to have a little bit of cushion there in our reserves in case we do have a recession.
Joe, just a little bit of rationale behind the 21% as a recommendation.
Well, I mean, if it was up to me, I would maybe even go a little bit higher, but you know, I know council's appetite to balance out, you know, healthy reserves with also addressing the unfunded capital needs, and it's, you know, over $100 million. So my rationale was, while I know 20% is where we're at right now, if we go back right here, you know, we can't absorb the 21%. You would still have $7 million to allocate out for this year, and then look at, you know, maybe revisit mid-year, where are we at? You know, did a recession happen? Is it having a negative impact on the El Segundo revenues and the economy? If not, maybe then, you know, spend that extra 1%. If it is having a negative impact, we may need to use that to absorb the negative impacts on our economy. So that was my rationale of having that 21%. Again, I know it's that balance between funding the unfunded capital needs, and also providing, adequate reserve levels.
How does the council feel? I think 20%. What you said earlier, I think, Chris, you recalled it was like a $16 million short or drop in the general fund that we had to bridge the gap of in the Great Recession, which was the worst recession barring 1929 or whatever. So I'm comfortable with the 20% and using the rest of the money for the capital improvement projects. I can't speak for my colleagues, though.
I concur 100%. I think we need to have some flexibility with these capital improvement projects because the longer we wait to get them done, the more expensive they're going to be.
I concur as well.
Can I ask one thing? Because this has been a somewhat hotly debated last part of a budget. And we went from 15% and a zealous argument to go to 10% a few years ago. And then the previous city manager indicated that in his experience in public sector that he thought 35% was desirable. And so I would just be curious to put the city manager on the spot, the interim city manager. We've experienced the entire Arby's menu
Yes.
here.
I've been in both contract cities and full-service cities. It does vary. 20% is on the low side that I've seen, and the 30 to 35% that I've seen is obviously a much more stable reserve. In contract cities, it's upwards of 50 to 60%. So 20% in all honesty is on the low side, but is doable if that's what the council wants. But when Joe and I talked about this, we felt that an extra 1% gives us almost an extra $1 million in the reserve just in case. So yeah, that's been my experience over the years.
The only thing is to Lance's point, cost of construction is just it's escalating. And so sitting on that money, especially when we're in an inflationary time, the money's getting devalued, right? So I actually think we should front load our capital improvement.
Yeah, during I think, Darrell, in your experience also, during good times, it's easy to carry a much heavier fund. Okay, it's raining out there, so we have to take care of things. And then once we start knocking down some of these problems that we have, we can start talking about a higher reserve fund, in my opinion.
And I think, and we may not be able to get to it this afternoon, the capital budget itself, but yes, there are a significant amount of capital projects that do need to be addressed, and I completely understand what the council's going with that. It would be beneficial to start funding some of those now while we do have the money.
I'm going to throw a complete curveball here. So obviously we don't have $7.9 million in our bank accounts, but I know the way I always think about money, and I think cash is king. And so if I'm going to do any kind of project or anything, I'm always looking for financing. And I try to finance it knowing that I can keep my cash working for me, earning a percentage, doing something. And if the sky falls, I have the cash to fall back on, and now I'm just having enough to make a payment on whatever I've financed. And so when I think about $7.9 million, $7.9 million does not get us home on any of the projects that are ahead of us. It scratches the surface, and after we start dealing it out like playing cards, we realize that we haven't truly made an effect. And so I would just say this. I would say that I'm happy at the 20%, but Joe, if your department and the city manager's department could come back to us and show us other options and other ways to finance the projects that we all have the desire to get completed and how that might look, I would just like us to be as wise with this money as humanly possible. We went to the POBs, right? The thought there is we've essentially established stability with that cost in perpetuity. There's, the Joe, I'm actually sad there's not that gloom and doom slide in here. Yeah. We're like, hey, our unfunded liability cost is going to jump in 2032, right? So I think that was the year 2032. It was like we were dreading that year. And so it's my personal opinion that we look at other options, and if there is a financing option out there that can help us get projects started online and across the line, and then we can use this money, spread it out over, 10, 15, 20 years, I think we would just be much better stewards of the funds, rather than like, okay, well, hey, we got $8 million, we get one-time spend, let's spend it, I just think that's kind of silly. It's like you found $100 and you need to go to Vegas. It just doesn't make sense. So that's my 2 cents.
We did authorize, didn't we direct staff to, we did direct staff to look at ways to get the capital improvement projects, including going out to the debt markets, which we haven't done since the Douglas Street project.
That is correct. And so I have been working with our financial advisor, Kane Financial. So that was the team that helped us with the pension obligation bonds. And I should be bringing something to council. Maybe we can just incorporate it into the next budget study session.
To Councilman Nichols' point, though, it'd be interesting to have the Treasury weigh in, too. What could they do with that in this market, given it's pretty volatile right now, but that versus the rate of borrowing if we're going to go out to market. So there's definitely something there to look at the delta between those two things.
Okay, but what I'm hearing right now, the majority of the council is saying 20%.
Yeah, I think we like the 20%. We also would like to encourage you to, unless someone correct me if I'm wrong, to exhaust all options to get that CIP funded. Maybe we don't have to use, to Councilman Nichols' point, any of the $7.9 or $8 million, but instead could put that money to work at a better interest rate longer term. So who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a draft report from our FA, Canyon. I just haven't had the opportunity to look at it yet, but I will do that.
And just for clarification purposes, when funds are in the general fund reserve, those fall into that category where it's very restricted as to how that can be invested, correct?
It's invested per our investment policy, which, there's a wide range of investments. It could be in LAIF, which is kind of like
But most of the things that we see from Mr. Robinson when he brings his report, I'm just
it could
thinking
be in
because
there.
there's been other, was it the OPEC trust or OPEB trust?
Yeah,
that was
won't be in the
performing
OPEB trust,
I
no.
know that,
Yeah.
but it was performing well because that didn't have the same restrictions.
Correct.
As,
Correct.
As say the general fund.
That is correct. Yeah, we can't have any investments beyond 5 years. It's really restricted to, government, treasuries, bonds.
Can we have reserves in any other funds other than just the general fund reserve fund?
Oh, we do. So we do have reserves in all the other categories. That first slide I showed you we have what's called a fund balance, and that gets invested out through Treasury as well.
I think the question is, are there other vehicles?
With better
Do we have
yield.
there's a 10% of CalPERS can go to a private equity portion that they carve out. Are we bound by state law, or can we in the municipal code say we want to carve out $2 million of that to?
We're bound by state law, and unfortunately, that is very restrictive. We can't invest in equities.
All those things. Yeah.
No, we can't invest in equities. We can't invest in overseas funds. So it is very restrictive, and it's state code. So the municipality has to be in compliance with the state code. We can be more restrictive, but not less restrictive.
Question. That trust fund that I was talking about that performed so well, right? Those funds could only be used towards pension obligation, correct?
So we have two trust funds. Yes, one is for pension obligations. The other one is for retiree health care.
Okay, so our POB payment per year is?
9.7 million.
9.7 million. So if we were to take $7.9 million and put it in that trust fund and have it earning, we could then use its earnings towards that $9.8 million payment that we have to make each year, correct?
So yes. However, the way that trust fund is set up right now, it's really not for short-term investment, which is more what you're talking about. It's more for long-term investment. You have a little bit more risk, but better reward. And that's why we have been performing very well in that
I
trust
guess I'm
fund.
just trying to think outside the box. How can I
Yeah.
make the $7.9 million
Yeah, the idea is
the
if you-
best? I want you to turn that $7.9 million into $32 million.
If you supercharge that trust, can you use that as effectively an endowment to pay the POB, and then the money we would be spending from the general fund on the POB, we in turn would
No, some of these discussions can get me in big trouble, but
but
It's just, and it's not, this is not Mickey Mouse finance. This is,
No.
it's really just me trying to say, hey, if we play our cards correctly, right, we can potentially set up future councils with that $9.8 million being funded, you know, by earnings that are coming out of a different trust fund. It's just where are we putting the money?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
And I
it
don't
is-
want to say, hey, Joe, I want to
Yep.
super fund your reserve fund, and then have Mr. Robinson come back to us and tell us that, well, you know, Leif's only getting us, you know, 0.5% or so, you know what I mean?
Unfortunately, yeah, we are bound by, by state law. Now, we can put money in those trust funds. It can only be general fund dollars. We're not allowed to put Measure M, Measure R, any of these special revenue funds or any of these grant or restricted funds. You cannot put those in the trust. So your only flexibility would be the general fund dollars. So, yeah. And then Orange County did this in the 80s and 90s, and that's why the state created all these tight regulations on how municipalities can invest their funds. So,
Okay, so we're at 20% in.
Okay.
Sounds like, okay.
and then the Economic Uncertainty Reserve. So currently, we have a balance of 1.9 million. That did dip down to 1 million. We funded back 900,000, and I'm just requesting that we replenish that to the full 2 million per council policy, which would mean $100,000 needs to be put back in there. So, it's, do you want to leave it at the 1.9 million
I
or?
think 2 million, right, everybody? Yes.
Okay, great.
Just a quick, I don't want to totally derail this. Quick question, is there a reason why we don't make that a percent? You know, we go for a 20% reserve, is there a reason economic uncertainty is a flat dollar value? Just tradition or round number? Or?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Just probably. I think that way it's not a moving number each year, moving target each year. It was just a flat dollar amount. And we can increase that dollar amount if council so desires. Okay, other reserves, so we do have the pension trust, 5.1 million sitting in there right now. Again, recommending pulling out 1,015,000 to make our UAL payment. That's what that trust is there for. Top Golf, we already talked about this, so I'll skip that one.
So real quick, so we're putting 390 into the dedicated repayment of the loan, which has been sitting on the books for how many years?
Ooh, 2 decades.
So I just want to make sure that, is that just like an accounting thing, just to clear that off the books? Or should we be putting that into our CPI?
Well, I mean, it's ultimately up to council. So council created this policy last April, and per council's policy, it was 60 to 70% that goes to pension contributions, 30 to 40% go to the equipment replacement. And then once those items are paid off, then all that goes to capital.
You got to remember the equipment replacement fund borrowed the money. They borrowed the money from that, and then equipment replacement borrowed it from the general fund when the equipment needed to be replaced.
Correct.
And so ultimately, once that fund is paid back, then potentially the general fund could be paid back as well?
Yes,
Is that the concept?
that is correct.
Yeah.
Or you just say, okay, we want to exonerate the loan, and that means now the equipment replacement fund is severely unfunded, and we have to figure out a way to, make a lot of that equipment last that may be problematic.
Okay.
Mr. Mallory was going to come up and touch on the IT initiatives.
Are we going to stick to 5 p.m., right? Pretty much have to, because we got close coming up in 8 minutes.
This will probably be the last slide.
Okay, thanks.
It'd actually be a good point to break, and we'll schedule a follow-up.
Yeah, and I can do this in a few minutes, won't be a problem. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. This list really represents some of the proposed initiatives for 22 and 23. I won't go through every one, but some of the majority of the items are funded through the actual budget. There are some bigger items that need a little bit more information and a little bit more time in terms of the quotes. For example, item number 1, security cameras and door access for all facilities throughout the city, right? I believe PD, fire, a lot of their equipment is currently failing. So this would basically replace all door access as well as all the actual cameras. Having one central system, the way we've done it today is we've kind of hodgepodged it. So we have 2 or 3 different systems. So this will standardize that. I'll be working with Public Works as well as the CIP committee to see if we can get funding for this and to get an actual cost for it. Some of the other items that are big, item number 2, our ERP system is end of life in 2027. I would estimate that it may take us 2.5 to 3 years to replace that system. So we should start planning for that now. Because our ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planner. That's our financial system, payroll system. It's basically all of our finances. So we should really start to plan with respect to doing that. I believe that Joe has set aside some funds to start the evaluation, to start the research, so forth and so on. But that's a pretty big lift as it relates to these projects.
Charles, I have a question. So do you have, I know when we had the IT committee, there was we published a chart that identified all of the potential projects with a dollar amount and then the cost to implement, so a the cost to implement the project as well as the cost of the software, and then a time frame. You obviously are maintaining that still, correct?
Yes, I answer that question with hesitation because we're still working off of the old list. One of the items in here is to create a new strategic plan so that we can go through and we can list the new items that we want to execute, as well as provide quotes and get associated dollar amounts. Quite frankly, I'm still working off of the old strategic plan because there are a number of items in there that were not complete. ERP was one of them, so it's pretty big. Another of the items in there, I think, was actually the door access. Number 7, the upgrade to the network infrastructure and cybersecurity. So to answer your questions, I'm still working from the old list. I do have an item on here that says we'll look at item number 10, look at a new strategic plan so that we can identify any new items and then associate costs with them, and then it'll look very familiar to that original list that we started with and
I'm
from.
looking at number 3, study Smoky Hollow area internet service provider potential. I mean, do we really have to do another study? We already know that there's a lack of internet.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like, how much shouldn't we be funding the fiber? Like,
Maybe I should have been more descriptive there. Yeah. Study to me means to start to interact and look at possible public-private partnerships that we can get people in there to start to provide the actual service, as opposed to, do we need fiber there or do we not? I think we all know we need fiber, but this is more of a study to start to work with the AT&Ts of the world, the Spectrums, or even a public-private partnership to see if we can get someone in there that could leverage maybe even some of our fiber. We could potentially make revenue on leasing some of our fiber out. They would take care of that last mile, if you will, and then they would actually do the customer service. They would actually interact with the residents and or the people in Smoky Hollow.
So one of the things, I mean, we was thinking, I know it brought up earlier about justifying head count and putting in a category, like, is it revenue generation, is it customer service? One of the things, the other layer that really is important is, we just did this whole strategic planning session where we 5, put orange dots on, our high priorities. And if you took a step back and looked at the end, the majority of those dots were really in
development services,
economic development. Sorry. Anyway, so as we go through these projects, we as a council prioritize economic development because the reason why we do that is what the 90% of our revenue is from our corporate sector. So we know that by ensuring that we provide the best service for our corporations, we have more money to provide service for our residents. So as we go through these projects for IT and even headcount, it's important that we look at, are we bringing on back headcount? Like I noticed that the communications person was still frozen. You know, that was one of our #1 goals, was to be the best in communications, yet we're freezing that headcount. So I just want to make sure that we're bringing back the headcount or picking projects that align to our strategic plan. And every time we spend money or sit back and, you know, are we saying, does this fit to our strategic plan and the priorities that we as a council has established? I just want to put that out there.
That's an excellent point. And if and as these items progress, we will bring them to council and tie them to a very specific strategic item, right? So, and if that doesn't pass muster, then, you know, we cross this item off the list and move on to the next project, or move on to something that's more in alignment with the actual strategic plan. Part of my creation of this list was as a result of our strategic meeting, and I thought many of these items in some way, shape, or form do meet that objective. However, I will admit that I probably need to take a closer look at the dots to see which of these more closely align with the dots, if that, in terms of the dot matrix voting, if that makes sense. Okay, other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mallory. All right, we're going to end. We're a minute early.
Okay.
We're adjourned. Thank you all very much. Appreciate everyone's time.